Guys, this is a really old build, maybe 5 years old, and this is a pretty good example of what a lot of my customers do to their Jeeps. This Jeep has been modified and upgraded and accessorized to the point that there's not much more you can do. We had dual batteries in this. Well, we didn't, they were added. Now this had smart charging batteries which were causing issues, so we got rid of the smart charging and made it discrete. This is after we cleaned it up. We got several onboard air compressors. You can tell this is an early swap by that old fuse block. This is the fuse block we used about 5 years ago. We've got dual tanks in this build, and they were causing all sorts of issues, and we'll go into that later. This is an L94 Cadillac engine, I think 2013, 2012, and it has lots of miles on it off-road, as you can see. This was a really heavy Jeep, and it still somewhat is, just because all the stuff that he's added. We've got an Atlas 4-speed, CBs, all sorts of radios, refrigerators, you know all the stuff guys add, tablet mounts. So this Jeep is here to get cleaned up. We got hydraulics on this Jeep. Like I said, there's just not a whole lot more you can add. PSC, RCVs. This is an early ECM mount. We actually still offer this mount. This one had the relay mounts on it, but if you want to put an S-Pod on top of this, it's one of the few things this Jeep doesn't have. You can get the version without the relays and the S-Pod will go right on top of it. This is our early fuse block here, but it's done well in the last 5 years. We did upgrade this to the Camaro SS fan. As you can see, it's 2016 variable speed, pulse width modulated, outrunner, brushless, electronically speed controlled fan. Puts out about 4,000 CFM. This is a 52mm dual pass radiator. Got an A or B compressor over here for onboard air as well as the lockers. This Jeep has just got a ton of stuff in it, and it is filthy. We changed the air filter. We got to change the oil still. It's been wheeled a lot out in Colorado, and it does have to negotiate the mountains in Colorado at high altitude. That's why we upgraded this fan. And the fuel tanks were causing a lot of issues going lean. I think we got that squared away, and we'll go into that later. Like I said, we got a Gen right rear sway bar, tire carrier, fuel tanks, steel bumper, shovel, high lift jack, you name it, it's on here. So let's drive it some more. So here we are in this 0809 JKU Rubicon, really heavy. It's got a 6.2 L94 in it. This swap was done probably 5 years ago, and lots of things were added. We've got CBs, radios, tablets, lockers, Atlas 4-speed, dual tanks, lights, you name it. Now this vehicle has been optioned out to the point that it started to have issues. One, it had dual batteries installed, and they were using a smart isolator. As you know, we're not real happy with the smart isolator. And this Jeep had the fans connected to the auxiliary battery. And what would happen is, as the vehicle was running, one of the batteries would isolate because the smart electronics sensed that it was charging too much and shut off one battery. Problem is, when you shut the key off, since the trigger voltage, which is I believe 12.7 on the Cole-Hersey smart isolator, was not triggered because there was a surface charge and it floated at that trigger point, the auxiliary battery would then run down the main battery. So basically we're losing our fans, we're discharging both of our batteries. We ended up putting a discrete isolator in that we've talked about many times before, and I suggest you do the same thing if you have a smart isolator. If you're not having problems with your smart isolator, then fine. This Jeep is heavily optioned, and it has literally dozens of aftermarket circuits tapped in. It was really a mess. Part two of that mess was dual tanks. Now, a tank was installed in the rear with a separate fuel pump, and then a solenoid, electronic solenoid, was installed to control the fuel pumps. Here's the problem, is the way it was set up, the original sending unit plug, which is about a 14 gauge wire, I'm going to say, on the fuel pump, was tapped into. Then those wires were run all the way forward in the cab to this switch. Then they were run all the way back to the tank. So now we got 25-30 feet of wire, small gauge, trying to power and ground these dual pumps as well as the solenoid unit, and it was losing voltage. We measured a 5-volt drop across the ground circuit, and the power side was even worse. The engine was leaning out, and obviously it had to be corrected. So he fought that problem for a while, as well as all these other electrical gremlins. So what we ended up doing is we isolated the batteries with a dumb isolator. We cleaned up the wires as much as we could. We put the fan in and the fuel pumps on the primary battery, as they should be. But both these batteries are charging now as I drive. There's not some circuit that's going to shut one off. And then they're both isolated when you stop. Now the fuel pumps, we ended up running dual heavy-duty relays up in the engine compartment, feeding the fuel pump power, each fuel pump powered. And all we're using this switch for now is to trigger those relays. So now we've got about 6-8 feet of heavy gauge wire going directly to the pump. We beefed up the ground circuit, and I've had zero issues on this test drive. Before, you could literally shake the harness and watch the fuel trims go lean. It would throw a PO 171, 174. I'm not seeing any of that now. In fact, you can see we're running about -3% on our fuel trim, which is about perfect. Now, a little bit about this Jeep. It's a build that was done many years ago with an L94 and our early Gen 2 electronics. It may have even have some late Gen 1 electronics in it. You can see we are supporting the cruise control on this build through the dash and through our Motec module, versus the one that had the light in the switch, which is probably 6 or 7 years old. And we don't have any need to upgrade this Jeep. It runs awesome. The L94 runs great. This L94 is in desperate need of some care, oil change. We changed the filter out. This Jeep has seen a lot of service up in the Colorado mountains, in Ouray, Grand Junction. In fact, this Jeep, going over the Eisenhower Pass, I believe it was, blew a heater hose and hit 300 degrees. That's right, the coolant temp hit 300 degrees. This is a couple of years ago, and it's still running, and it's still running great. So it just goes to show the durability of this engine and of this early Motec kit. And this is something that really is important to me. The earlier kits were awesome kits. They used more discrete integration, but that also meant less invasiveness, less corruption, less complexity, and you still had virtually full functionality. So sometimes evolution is not a good thing, sometimes de-evolution is a good thing. And I know this Gen 2 swap like the back of my hand, and I am comfortable driving this Jeep out into the middle of nowhere. Now, the modifications that were added, the dual pumps, the dual batteries, isolating the auxiliary battery from the main battery, and then hooking the fans and the fuel pumps to that auxiliary battery was not a good thing. But as far as the Motec swap goes, this is a really solid build, and this Jeep is seeing a lot of hard off-road miles. I'm even told that he wheeled out of Ouray towing a TJ with this Jeep with the Atlas 4-speed, and that's a lot of weight because this Jeep used to weigh over 7,000 pounds. So being old is not a bad thing, and this is a great Jeep. There's still a few other little issues that this Jeep has. It's got a slight driveline vibration, and definitely needs servicing of all the fluids. But it's a driver, and it gets driven. So sometimes it's good to look back, and what I might do is go back to the very beginning, 2008. The original LSJK that I put on the road back in 2008 is still on the road, and it is using our earliest electronics that we produced. It still has full cruise control functionality with a body control module, power modes, tap shift, right from the very first JK that we did. It has full emissions. It was certified here in Nevada back, I believe, in 2009. It has passed the emissions test with no repairs since. It has gone through 7 summers, maybe 8, here in Vegas with the stock fan and stock radiator. It does have a 5.3 engine in it, and it just goes to show the value you can get in an LS. That 5.3 now has 140,000 miles on it, still runs like a top, doesn't burn a drop of oil, runs cool. And I took that Jeep to New York, I've taken it to Florida from Las Vegas, it's been to California many a times, and it's just a great value. And when we look back at where the LSJK swap came from, that's really where it all started. Pretty much everything grew out of that swap. It was a proof of concept, and it just worked so well that the rest was downhill. Of course, we improved electronics, we improved the hardware, but from that very first Genesis build, it proved how well a JK can work with an LS motor installed. And up to that point, there were guys putting LSs in JKs, but they weren't integrating them. They weren't using hydraulic mounts. They weren't supporting OE cruise control. What you see today is everything grew out of that original swap, and there's different variations of it. But still, in my opinion, that swap is solid. It passes an emissions test. It has full diagnostics and monitoring. It's in use every day, and it proves itself every day. And that was our commitment and mission goal back in 2008, and it's still our mission and commitment today. All we've done is streamlined the install, improved some of the electronics, but driving that Jeep across country is not very different than driving this Jeep across country, which is a Gen 2 build, or our new Gen 4 builds with CAN interface. The more complex we get, though, the more chance there is, I'm not going to say the more chance there is of failure. Failure is really a product of improper engineering. The more complex we make it, the less simple it becomes, the more chance there is for a failure. And if we look back at what we did in the early days, it was pretty simple. Yes, the install was not as easy. Yes, the install took a lot longer. But in the end, if you knew what you were doing, if you installed it properly, it was an excellent product. And one of the issues we had many years ago was shops. We built our kit as a builder kit, not as a plug and play stereo instruction kit. And guys would have a difficult time if they weren't a shop and they weren't trained and they didn't have experience in engine swaps installing our early kits. The biggest difference with our kits today is they are almost plug and play. There's only a handful of wires that need to be tapped into the vehicle, and we have much better instructions. However, the early kits were just as good. They were not as well understood in the install, but they were intended for our installers, for shops that were trained by us. And when our early kits would get into the hands of a end user, for the most part, with tech support, they all worked out very well. And there's many guys driving our Gen 1 kits still today. But the kit install has come a long way, and our new Gen 4 is about as easy as it gets. I can't really see it get much easier without losing something. We can reduce the wire count. We can reduce the electronic circuits or interfacing, but then we're going to start losing redundancies, safeties, emissions, and all the other things that we've talked about that you're probably tired of hearing me mention. So this build is ready to ship, and it's a good old LSJK from the past, and I'm confident this build will be on the road for many years to come.